Hello and welcome to the introduction for 600 Essential English Vocabulary Words. Here, my name is Rose Chang, and I am so honored and so excited to go ahead and introduce you to this brand new series. And so, let's go ahead and get into exactly what this series is going to be about and how we can go about maybe considering this idea of a vocabulary series that we'll be talking about, again, essential vocabulary words. And so the first thing I would like to state here is that this specific series is going to be dedicated for students oftentimes in grades 7, 8, and 9. Again, talking about the essential vocabulary words, words that you have to know at this point, or it's going to get a bit more difficult by the time you get into the later years of your high school era, okay? And so keeping that in mind as well, we're also going to be talking about A through Z words, talking about words that start from A all the way into Z, not skipping a single letter. We have a very bbig variety here for us today. And so that is generally the outline that we are going to be following along with as we move forward and explain exactly what this series is. And so the question that I get asked a lot is, who is this lecture for? To begin with, I would like to state that this is a series that is open for middle school students as well as early high school students too. And especially there are students who need to expand their vocabulary. Oftentimes I will say that there is a very big jump in terms of academia from middle school to high school. It changes a lot. There's also a lot new, I would say, objectives and expectations that are placed on the student to perform well academically. And so for that reason, oftentimes a lot of students might feel that it's too difficult suddenly, or perhaps they will hit a wall and it feels like they can't really get past this wall after a certain point. And this happens because oftentimes there is a lack of vocabulary that is going to allow them to explain how they feel, explain their thinking, or even perhaps as they're reading it, they run into the word and they don't understand it and it doesn't make any sense. And there's a reason why we need to be talking about essential vocabulary words. Even if we have a native student, such as myself, when I was my age back in grade 7, grade 8, during that time period when I was reading all these books, even as somebody who was interested in English very much so, I still needed my vocabulary list in order to actually memorize the words, but more importantly, actually know how to use them as well. And so that's the reason why I cannot highly recommend this series enough for these students particularly, as they will be able to expand their vocabulary, but also teach them how to use it effectively in their papers and also in day-to-day speaking. So we might be saying, middle school students, we might be saying early high school students, but we also just want to generally say that it is highly recommended for all students too, especially those who need to write more academically. If you feel that the student is progressing very quickly, or perhaps that there is a student out there that might need a little bit more work with vocabulary, even if they're not early high school, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. As long as there is somebody out there who wants to learn how to write academically, to use these words effectively, to expand their vocabulary so they have a broader horizon for them to play with, again, this is that series that is going to help them expand on this idea. And so when we're talking about where are these words actually coming from, we have a few different sources. We first off have high school textbooks that are actually going to be using these words quite often. Again, we talk about those contexts there. Additionally, we also have the SSAT, the SAT, and the TOEFL exam too. And so when we're talking about exams, a lot of people tend to say, well, maybe if we just looked at, these specific words for this specific exam. Well, yes, that works, but also we want to be able to make sure we get all of these at the same time. Oftentimes people who take the SSAT take the SAT. People who take the SAT oftentimes take the TOEFL. And so combining all this together and having one really good source where we have the foundational vocabulary that is necessary to do well in all of these ways, again, this is that series that's going to be talking about the essential vocabulary words. And so when we're breaking down this specific series, this is generally the way that we want to be looking at it. And for anybody out there who is really interested in hearing the statistics, this is the slide for you. And so first, we're going to be explaining that there are 60 lessons or lectures in this series, and each one will contain 10 words. Each lesson with 10 words means that there are 600 words total. And then each word will also have 5 to 10 synonyms. Again, 5 being the minimum, 10 being the maximum. We will have over 2,500 plus synonyms for us to look at, regard, and also maybe reflect on as we are writing. And lastly, we have the most important part, which is the example sentences. This series is very highly regarded because of the fact that there are so many example sentences. Here, for each word that we're going to be looking at, we're going to be talking about 4 different sentences at the same time. And so with 60 lessons, that equals up to 2,400 sentences that we will be going over, taking our time, understanding the context, understanding the nuance, and which word works best, especially in this kind of scenario. Again, having that reference is going to allow us to see how the word is used and how we also might be able to use that word. And so again, talking about those example sentences, I cannot stress this enough. Being able to see how these words are being properly used alongside somebody who can actually explain why this word works well, but not just simply because of the dictionary definition, but also because of the native nuance that is existing in that word. Again, certain words will work best in certain kinds of scenarios. This is not usually covered in a lot of other series. This one, however, we'll be talking about it in the sense of an American's perspective. If you're talking about American English, we will be talking about that kind of nuance here. And so why this vocabulary series in particular, and why do students need to study vocabulary in the first place? Now, again, to reiterate, we have this because we want to expand their vocabulary. The idea that vocabulary is going to, be the same for a long period of time, or perhaps all we need to learn are the really big words when it comes to exam season. That's not always the case. We also want to know how to actually use these words. It's very useless if we don't know how to use them. So this series is going to teach us how to not only expand it, but to use it too. And we also want to think about new ways to think and write academically and formally. So raising English comprehension and staying on top of class being one of those main objectives that we're going to carry with us throughout all 60 lectures. Some of the special features for this particular series are the following. So vocabulary that is used often in academic and formal writing. This is one very big main point. Oftentimes students will see these vocabulary words, they use them on the exam, they don't use them in their papers. However, we're talking about words that can be used in academic settings as well as formal settings. And so maybe they can use it on their tests, maybe they can use it in formal settings when they're talking out loud, but the thing is that the words will still be used regardless. Explanations that make the words easier to remember and recall, explanations that are fun, with word associations, with history included. And lastly, word breakdowns with prefixes, suffixes, root words, history, and fun stories. Once more, they kind of go hand in hand here. When we're talking about explanations and word breakdowns, I'm going to be taking them step by step, explaining the word, why it's important, maybe even the root history as well, talking about why it's something that we need to be paying attention to. And then additionally, vocabulary that covers connotations, history, culture, and formality. Out of all these, I would definitely say that the word connotation is probably the most important one. Once more, it's that native nuance that other series will not discuss. And all necessary context to understand the word and actually use it in essays and designed to satisfy the course requirements for high school English classes. Oftentimes, by the time we get to high school English classes, they will be expecting you to use these words in every single essay. They are going to expect you to be able to say the same thought over and over again, but differently, with different words and with different nuances, different feelings. And so, with that in mind, we want to be able to have all that context. And so, when that time comes, when we have to write those sentences, we'll be able to do so and do it accurately, efficiently, and fluently as well. And so this is a little bit of the example sentence and example, I would say also word, dictionary definition, and synonym that we will be having in these lecture series. So starting with the word, knowing how to pronounce it, then moving on to the dictionary definition, explaining the synonyms here, and then going straight into the sentences as well, talking about the word in the sentence, how it's used, the importance of the word as well, before we move on to another 3 sentences that will then, again, be talked about one at a time, broken down, and explaining maybe even what synonym might work best for this kind of scenario. And so adding all that information here, we're going to be seeing a lot of different explanations, contexts, connotations, once more, about vocabulary words. And so this is a little bit about myself. I am currently working as an international and overseas instructor. I primarily focus on exams specifically designed for English students or speakers of English. And so we have TOEFL, SAT. I also work on essay writing alongside university entrance exams. And I also do consultations and do work specifically on college application essays. Here, this would be the SOP or the Statement of Purpose. Furthermore, I also am a native English speaker. I was born in America, raised in America, got my degree in high school, specifically from California, until I moved to Korea specifically to get my English language and literature degree from Korea University, at which point I graduated with great honors and then moved to America once more to continue on with my education. I currently recently graduated from Carnegie Mellon University with a Master's of Arts in Literary and Cultural Studies. Again, this is an English program, and I'm going to be working on my PhD, my doctorate, specifically in the same program, same school, in Literary and Cultural Studies, looking at decoloniality, post-colonialism, diaspora, and contemporary American studies. And so, keeping this in mind and wrapping everything up, I would just like to really reiterate to all of us here that these are pretty much the breakdowns of this particular series. Again, 600 words, over 2,500 synonyms, and 2,400 sentences. And so simply looking at the numbers, simply thinking about the way that we're going to be discussing each and every single word, talking about the essential vocabulary. Again, this is going to be all-inclusive and going to broaden the horizons of any student out there who wants to learn how to write academically and formally, and also to simply learn a little bit more about English one step at a time. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to hear and see you guys in class soon. So welcome to our vocabulary series. I'm going to be starting off today with our letter A words, and we're going to be going in a generic alphabetical order just to keep sure that, maybe we're going to be keeping along and having everything in a pretty decent order. That way we can look back on it with pretty much good ease when we are reading our books. So first things first, we want to talk about the letter A, part 1. What are our 10 words that we're going to be discussing today? And I want you guys to follow along with me as I read these out loud because it's important to be able to read them, but also to be able to pronounce them. So starting off with the first one, ardent, abundant, acerbic, acclimate, accumulate, abrasive, arcane, adhere, allocate, ascertain. Now these are our 10 words that we're going to be discussing today, but don't worry, I'm going to give you guys a lot more words as well, especially in our synonyms section. So let's take this a bit slow and start off with our first word, which is an adjective, ardent. Here the word means to express eager support or activity with warmth. Now, if I were to say there is a key word in this definition that we definitely want to keep in mind, I would definitely say it's this idea of warmth. Warmth is incredibly important when we're talking about the word ardent. It's not simply that you want to express your support, but you also want to do it in a very warm, kind, and very passionate manner. And for that reason, we have these synonyms here: fiery, hot, glowing, zealous, incandescent, fervid, and passionate. If I were to say that any of these words were maybe related to this idea of warmth or heat, we have these three over here that are quite strong, I would say, and also the word incandescent, passionate, and also fervid. I would even argue that feverish would also work well as a synonym depending on how you use it in context, but as you can see, all of these words have something related to do with heat or light. Fiery, hot, these are of course temperature words. Glowing, incandescent, these are words that describe light. Then we have fervid, very much a fiery kind of hot feeling as well. And the word passionate too tends to have a very hot kind of connotation. Connotation, of course, meaning that it is related to that word, or in certain contexts it might have a different kind of definition or meaning. So the word passionate is a bit warmer as well. The only one that I would say is a little bit different is this one right here, zealous. Zealous is a bit different just simply because it doesn't have anything to do with heat, but rather does fall more in line with the word passionate. And so if you want to use the word ardent in a sentence, or you want to be using it more often in your writing, then you would choose, let's say, if you were talking about doing something passionately, strongly, you might say you have something more passionate to offer, or perhaps something zealous, something incandescent. Fiery, hot, and glowing, these words are quite simple, so maybe we would want to avoid them in our academic writing, but otherwise, these are all really good synonyms for us to use. So with that being said, let's take a little bit of a glance at this one right here. The most ardent fans are those who show up several hours before the concert. The most ardent fans, so the ones eager to support or activity with warmth, they are fans. Oftentimes, if you're a fan of something, you want to support such thing, and these fans are doing it in a very warm and very kind manner. They're showing up early to show their support. And so that's how we can use the word ardent in these kinds of situations and these scenarios. With that being said, though, let's go ahead and take a look at a few more sample sentences. I love you most ardently. Now, if you guys are movie buffs or enjoy Pride and Prejudice like I do, then you would know that this is quite a famous sentence. I love you most ardently. As you can notice here, we have the word ardently with the ly. This ly, of course, indicating that this is an adverb. Oftentimes, if you want to turn an adjective into an adverb, you just normally have to add this little ly and you're good to go. And that is what we did here. It means the exact same thing, but we just changed the word form. As an ardent fan of comic books, he was the first one in line to see the brand new movie. Of course, we have that idea again of being a warm supporter, a very excited supporter. And if you ask her questions about poetry, she'll answer them all as an ardent reader of literature. So here, to ardent reader of literature, she's a passionate reader, she's a fiery reader, she's an incandescent, zealous reader of literature. Therefore, if you ask her about poetry, because she's passionate about it, of course she'll be able to tell you. And so that's how we can use the word ardent. And so if you like using the word passionate or feel strongly about something, might as well just use the word ardent. It's a much stronger word anyway, and it looks great on your essays. Then we have the word abundant. This is a verb existing or occurring in large amounts. Now, keywords here, large amounts. Large being that real keyword there. Abundant means large amounts. Synonyms, ample, aplenty, bounteous, galore, plentiful, plenty, and generous. Now, here you're going to also realize that we have some familiar words along with very repetitive words. And so I'll start up at the front here. We have the word aplenty. We also have plenty down here, and we also have plentiful. This word just naturally means to have an abundance or a lot of something. And so having a large amount, plenty, plentiful, plenty here, abundant there, it all means the exact same thing. Now, if I were to say that we want to be using this in an academic essay, right? Abundant is the one word that I would definitely say, make sure you use it. If not that, we want to be using the word plentiful. Or maybe bounteous. Bounteous is also a very strong word, and galore is also good as well. These are the ones that I would highly recommend that we use, especially in our essays and if we want those extra points. With spring just around the corner, the weather changed drastically and the wind was abundant. So what does that mean here? We see that the wind was abundant. But then we have to ask, okay, how could it be abundant? What is it trying to say? If it's in large amounts, it probably means that it was very gusty. There was a lot of wind everywhere. There was a bunch of people's hairs flying around, or their bags are clutching, their jackets closer to their bodies. The weather changed drastically, so suddenly there's wind everywhere. And it's not just a little bit, it's quite a large amount, and it's existing in the moment. And so that's how we can understand this idea of the word abundant. And so we want to be looking at some other sample sentences too, because we can't simply leave it at this. Without thinking, he ordered an abundant amount of food. There was no question with the abundant evidence that he was the criminal. A new shipment of goods was abundant and plentiful. So here we have the word abundant used in three different times, and they're all describing something very particular. So abundant here, talking about the amount of food. Then we have the word abundant here, talking about evidence for a crime. And then abundant something, what is that something? A shipment of goods. And so as we can see, this is what we are describing in this situation. Just make sure that when you're using this word that you know exactly what it is that you're describing, because sometimes it does move back and forth. That's just a little bit of a grammar thing. And with that, let's go on to our next word, because this one's quite easy. This one is acerbic. This is an adjective, sharply or bitingly critical, sarcastic or ironic in temper, mood, or tone. And so acerbic here, if we're going to pick out one word to really pay attention to, I would say sharply or bitingly critical. These are the ones that we want to keep an eye out on, because this is where our definition, our understanding of the word really comes in. Synonyms being acidic, acerb, biting, caustic, corrosive, pungent, scathing, and critical. So here, I would say all of these are quite strong, and I would also note that this is probably the one word that kind of stands out to me as a little bit different. Mostly because if we're looking at the rest of the words, they all kind of mean sour. If something's acidic in science, or if you're eating something that is acidic, like in lemon, it means that it's sour. And so we have something sour, 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 something that hurts, something that kind of burns you. But we have pungent, which also means to maybe smell quite strongly. Not quite a positive word, tends to be more negative, but the word acerbic also has a negative connotation to it, meaning that if you call somebody acerbic, if you say something's acerbic, you're not really giving them a compliment. The teacher's acerbic wit made the class fun to listen in on. And here we can see that the word acerbic is trying to be used in a more positive kind of spin, and you can also even argue that perhaps it's not positive. But what it does make is that it makes the class fun to listen in on because this teacher is very critical but very sharp as well. And so let's look at our sentences for this one. Her favorite roles to play are the acerbic ones since she has the complete opposite personality. What do you think this might mean in this context here? If I say that her roles that she likes to play are acerbic because she has the opposite personality, probably we would want to use an antonym to describe this person, this actress. We might say that she is a very friendly or outgoing or very kind, or perhaps a very mundane person as well. The acerbic commentary did not go unnoticed by the fans. Fans listening in on something hear some commentary, somebody talking, but it's very sharp, it's very critical. So here we are with G part 1. This is our 10 words. We're not talking about the 5 that we did the last 10. We're talking about a new 10. And let's read these out together before we get started. Gratuitous, gluttonous, guise, gaudy, gambit, genial, gullible, gratis, gate, gallant. And as you can see, some of these words, they seem a little bit familiar to us. A few of them do at least. And so let's take it very slow and talk about them one at a time, starting with the word gratuitous. This is an adjective, not called for by the circumstances, not necessary, appropriate, or justified. Here, not necessary is what we want to be paying close attention to. If something is considered gratuitous, it is not necessary, it was never wanted in the first place, and oftentimes you can go both ways. It can be both a positive word and a negative word. But oftentimes if we say the word gratuitous, oh, that's a bit gratuitous, or that's a little bit of a gratuitous subject, or, item that you're giving me, it means that, oh, I didn't need it in the first place. Why are you giving it to me? That's something unnecessary. I don't need it, never needed it, never wanted it. Synonyms here are unjustified, unwarranted, unprovoked, needless, superfluous, or redundant. Now, the word redundant is a little bit different than the rest of them, just simply because of the actual definition. The other ones, unjustified, unwarranted, unprovoked, needless, or superfluous, they all pretty much mean the exact same thing, which is it was never necessary. You didn't have to do it. It was quite extra, right? Extra and also not needed. But the word redundant is a little bit different because it has this idea of repetition. If I say one sentence and I say that exact same sentence again, I am being redundant. I'm repeating myself, and that second repetition is unnecessary. So this one's a little bit more specific, so if that's what you want to go for, then go for it. Really good word to use. But just know that it is a little bit different to the rest because the other ones talk mostly about how it's just not necessary. The film was criticized for its gratuitous violence. So if we're talking about gratuitous here and describing the word violence, we can immediately assume that this film that this person is talking about, or the film that people have been criticizing, had a lot of action sequences or sections in the film that were a little bit hard to watch, but also didn't quite make sense to the story probably. It was gratuitous, it was extra, it was unnecessary, not necessarily appropriate for the film, or completely unjustified. Long story short, we didn't need it. Why did we have to see it? And so, with that, let's take a look at a few more sentences together. This was a piece of gratuitous cruelty, as he has done nothing to justify such treatment. Again, we have the word gratuitous, and also keyword just to point out what we're talking about here, the word justify. Remember, it's unjust, it's unwarranted, unjustified. This was a piece of extra or unneeded cruelty, as he had done nothing to justify such treatment. He didn't do anything wrong. Why are you being overly mean to him, overly cruel? A fight scene later on also seems quite gratuitous. Maybe this person's talking about that exact same film that we were just discussing in that other sentence. But there's another fight scene, and that one also a bit extra. Doesn't make sense to the story. Didn't need to see it, didn't really want it. We must weigh the line between what's gratuitous and what's necessary. Here, weighing the line between what we don't need and what we absolutely do need. And in this kind of situation, the sentence actually speaks for itself. Even if you didn't understand the word gratuitous in this section, we already know if we say between one thing and the other, we are talking about two separate ideas, oftentimes opposing one another. So if something's necessary, then the word gratuitous must mean it's unnecessary. Then we're moving on to the word gluttonous, and this word has already kind of come up for us before, but I think it's good and appropriate that we discuss it here again. Marked by or given to excess in eating or drinking, greedy or excessive indulgence. Apparently we're just talking a lot about excess. So we have the idea of excess here, excessive here, greedy. Pretty much you have what you need, but no, you still want to have more. You still want to eat a little bit more. And the word gluttonous does have this connotation or this connection predominantly to eating or drinking food. That's why when we see the word glutton written as such, this is a noun. When we see the word glutton, that means it is a person who wants to eat or drink in excess. This might be somebody who's really hungry or somebody who just likes to eat a lot of food, but they are called a glutton because they keep eating and drinking and they don't really stop. Same thing though, we don't have to always make it about food. We can talk about something else entirely as well. It works just fine. Greedy or excessive indulgence, okay? Doing something that you like to an extreme degree. Therefore, our synonyms for today are audacious, esurient, greedy, hoggish, ravenous, swinish, and voracious. Now, again, you might notice something very interesting about our synonyms today. We have three words here that I think we definitely want to pay close attention to. We have the words hoggish, we have the word piggish, and also the word swinish. Now, we have the ish, and you might be thinking maybe that's what it is. No, not necessarily. We have the word hog, we have the word pig, and we also have the word swine. Swine spelled with an E at the very end there if we were to make it its own little noun. But my point is that we are talking about pigs. If you are a pig, then you tend to have that metaphor in your head that, you eat a lot, or it doesn't really matter what you eat, you just want to eat. And that's a little bit unfair to pigs because they're quite intelligent animals, but these words also work wonders in regards to this idea of gluttony, or wanting to constantly eat to an excessive degree. So we have sentences like this. The gluttonous customers had practically emptied the all-you-can-eat buffet. Man, if it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, then that must mean that they really ate a lot of food here. They were gluttonous customers. They wanted to eat a lot. They had the ability to eat in excess or drink in excess and also indulge in excess. Constantly this idea that it's a little bit too much. The gluttonous can binge watch the television show in a few days. If you are considered a gluttonous viewer, then you won't just sit there and watch a few episodes and stop right there. What if it's a really good show? Gluttonous viewers can actually sit there in 1 day or 2 days and just marathon, binge watch the entire thing, and therefore they are called gluttonous. They keep doing it in excess. Some gluttonous landlords keep piling rental increases onto their plates. This is a really good way of writing this. If you are gluttonous and you want to actually gather a lot of things, right? And we're not talking about food, but they make it sound like it's food. How is that so? They're talking about plates. You put food on plates. And so these gluttonous people keep bringing up rents or raising the rent or trying to bring up a lot of money and put it onto their plate so they can eat it. Very good way of writing it out here. During the holidays, I become quite gluttonous and gain a few pounds. And this is probably the easiest way that we can remember this word. We all tend to be a little bit like this when the seasons come around and they change and suddenly we're celebrating the holidays with our family. We tend to gain a little bit of weight because we eat a lot of food. And so with that, that's gluttonous. And let's move on to the next one, which is the word guise. This is an external appearance. External appearance. And synonyms are act, charade, facade, front, masquerade, play acting, pretense, or semblance. Now, this word might look a little bit familiar to us, and that's because of the word guise, and we see it quite often in other contexts. But most commonly, we will see it in this word. If we are in a disguise, or if we're watching a movie and somebody's in disguise, what does that mean? That means that they are dressed up as somebody else. Their external appearance is not who they are, it's something else. And so, during Halloween, you might say, oh, I'm in disguise, or oh, I'm wearing a costume. Or if you say, oh, like my friend's going on a date and I want to make sure that they're okay, then I will go in disguise. I will dress up as somebody else, somebody that doesn't look like me, and I'll sit there and I'll watch. You can't realize that it's me. It's not my external appearance. But guise on its own, if we were to just get rid of the word this right here and look at guise, then we're talking about just a general external appearance. And therefore, let's look at the synonyms. We have act, charade, facade. These are all really good. Act and charade mostly have to do with the actions that you do. Facade, front, masquerade, these ones are more specifically about the appearance. Play acting goes along with act and charade. Pretense kind of also goes with act and charade, and semblance definitely goes with here. So if we can just cut it like this, maybe that would be an easy way to remember the words. Additionally, we do have this word masquerade, and if you guys are familiar with any, classical, I guess, films or are interested in balls, and I would also say just with our M words, the 10 we're going to be talking about today, I do want to just give a little bit of a preface and explain that these words are going to be quite confusing, if not a little bit challenging. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and pronounce these words together and get started. Myriad, mellifluous, misnomer, maven, malaise, misanthrope, mediocre, malleable, milieu, modicum. Again, I feel like the words that start with the letter M just have a tendency to be a bit difficult to pronounce. At least that's what it looks like so far. And so just keeping that in mind, let's start off with our first word, which should be a bit of an easy one, if not a bit of a review for us, myriad. Myriad here is a noun, a large amount, too many to be numbered or counted. This is how we want to remember it specifically. It's an amount, but quite a large amount. We're talking about to the point where we have no idea how much there is. Additionally, we can also say that a myriad can be considered a variety, okay? If we're talking about this idea of myriad, we can also call it a variety. Let's say a mixed bag, it can be more eclectic, so it can be something of everything, but a myriad can also be this. Synonyms can be abundance, mass, multiplicity, plenitude, profusion, volume, chunk, or heap. As you can see, some of these words are quite advanced and some of them are quite not advanced. So maybe we don't want to use the word heap too often, or the word chunk, or perhaps even the word mass. These ones we want to keep away from our academic language because we don't really need to use these. We need to use the stronger ones. Abundance, multiplicity, plenitude, profusion, and volume are all really good, but I would say that the word abundance is probably the best one. Also, just as a side note, the word plenitude is also quite good as well. This idea of having plenty, right? Plenitude, plenty, we can see the connection there. The car can be outfitted with a myriad of options if you so choose. It can be outfitted with a lot of different options. So perhaps you want to switch out the seatbelt type, or maybe you want to switch out the steering wheel, maybe you want to switch out the speaker system, the audio system, the camera system. Whatever the case may be, there is a myriad of different things that you can choose, a wide variety, and also you can say a very large amount. There's quite a lot of different additional add-ons or I would also say options, excuse me, in order for you to have a very nice car that is to your liking. And so this is how we can use the word myriad. A lot, various, plenty, abundant, all those words are really good. I'll never be able to count the myriad of blessings I have received. This person is saying that they'll never be able to count it. That's very accurate. You can't really count a myriad, okay? Counting as an action is not physically possible with a myriad, and that's how you want to use it. Myriad means so much that you can't count it. The sparkling myriad of lights in the city reminded me of my days in Paris. They're in a city, they're looking out at night, and there's so many lights, they can't count it, but there's such a variety of them too, all spread out. Therefore, myriad is a really good word to use. Our house has been plagued with a myriad of insects during this summer. Of course, if it's summertime, I know for me, when there's mosquitoes in the house, there's not just one, but there's a lot of them. Too many to count. That's why we can say easily here that there is a myriad of insects inside the house during the summer. You guys probably agree with that too. You probably have had times where you were sleeping and you just hear mosquitoes flying around. Too many to count. You kill too many to count, and there have been myriads that were around you before. Moving on, we have the word mellifluous. This is an adjective having a smooth, rich flow, filled with something such as honey that sweetens. And that's how we kind of want to remember this idea of being very smooth and also being very rich, almost to the point where it's almost like honey as well. It's sweet, it's rich, it has a good flow. Also, we want to say that it's quite smooth as well, and this tends to be used with the voice. And so you will say that, oh, somebody has a mellifluous voice or a mellifluous tone. And we hear this quite often because this word naturally goes along quite well with this idea of a smooth, rich, sweet voice. Synonyms, therefore, also are euphonious, lyrical, mellifluent, mellow, melodic, or musical. As we can see, even these synonyms are very musical as well. We have the word lyrical, we have the word melodic, euphonious. If you guys know your root words, you would know that phone means kind of to listen or to sounds. Mellow as well. And so everything is quite musical. We already naturally have that idea that this word is going to be talking about sounds that we hear. She has a rich, mellifluous voice that gets her a lot of work in radio and TV commercials. She has a very pleasant voice to listen to. It's quite smooth, it has a good flow, and also it's very sweet as well, very pleasant to listen to. If somebody describes your voice as mellifluous, is that positive or negative? Absolutely, it's positive. It should not even be a question at that point, you guys. So make sure that if you are talking to somebody and you think they have a nice voice, compliment them on that and say that they have a quite mellifluous voice. The actor has a mellifluous voice that could lull anyone into a deep sleep. Again, this idea of a voice, lull anyone into a deep sleep. We have this idea of lulling, lullaby, putting somebody to bed, putting somebody to sleep. Young listeners have forgotten that music could be mellifluous and still have depth. Here we're talking about, again, not necessarily the voice, but we're talking about music. This is something else that we listen to. We listen to voices, we listen to music. Music can also be described as mellifluous. How so? Flow, smooth, rich, sweet, very pleasant to listen to. They wanted to hire a lady with a mellifluous voice for the job of a customer executive. Why? Because a customer executive has to talk quite a lot, and it's always pleasant to listen to somebody who knows what they're talking about, but also a voice that is easy to listen to. And for that reason, having a mellifluous voice tends to come in quite handy for a lot of people in these kinds of departments because they constantly have to talk and they always have to be on their best behavior. It's easy to listen to. Mellifluous voices definitely are the way to go. And with that being said, we have the word mellifluous again. I've said that word so many times at this point, I feel like my tongue is going to twist and fall off. So let's quickly move on to the next word. Here we have a misnomer. Now, for the other one, we talked about a moniker, which is, of course, a name that you give something else, another name, perhaps a nickname. Misnomer is kind of the opposite. A misnomer is a name that doesn't quite fit. It's a wrong name or an inappropriate designation. Designation is just a fancy way of saying name, but what do we want to focus on? Wrong name, okay? I know us. We're not going to be looking at the second definition. Make it easier for ourselves. It's a wrong name. It's something that is incorrect. So synonyms are misnamed, mistermed, miscalled, inapplicable title, mistitling, or denouncing. I would say denouncing is a bit of an kind of word. It works, but not necessarily in the same way. But as we can see, we have miss whatever, right? We have also this over here. Named, termed, called, titling, putting a name to something, giving something a title. All these words are very similar. Miss being, of course, our prefix saying it is done incorrectly. And so that one should be a bit of a no-brainer. It's something of a misnomer to refer to these inexperienced boys as soldiers when they're barely used to their uniforms. It's something incorrect. You can't really call them soldiers. Yeah, they're drafted. Yeah, they're gonna go fight in a war. Technically, they're labeled soldiers, but can we really call them soldiers? It's been one day. They're not even used to their uniforms yet. Are they truly soldiers? And so that's what this person's trying to say, that it's a bit of a misnomer. It's not necessarily the right thing to call them. They are perhaps starting out, but not necessarily somebody you would immediately say, hey, look, a soldier. It's a little bit of a wrong name or inappropriate designation. It would be more appropriate or less of a misnomer to call them new drafted kids, or perhaps adding a few more adjectives in front of the word soldier to clarify. Let me be the first to say that the moniker all day is a real misnomer. And looky here, we have the word moniker coming in. Look at us, we're very happy here. This is just another review for us, okay? Moniker all day, an all day title is something that we give to, let's say, a sale or whatnot, but it's a real misnomer. Why is that? It's not technically a full day. It's usually about 8 hours or maybe 9 hours at most. It's not considered a real full day, and therefore it's a real misnomer. It misleads us. It is mistitled. Villa was something of a misnomer. The place was no more than an old farmhouse. Would you really call an old farmhouse a villa? Not necessarily. You might do that to maybe advertise it a bit better, but it's a bit of a misnomer that you wouldn't really call it a villa. It would be more appropriate to call it something else. To call the escalator a staircase is a clear and dry misnomer. Escalators and staircases, as we know, especially if we could take that subway every day. Moving past that, let's talk about S part 1. This is our 10 words, our full 10 words just with this letter, and we have about 2 other parts after this as well. So just, again, hold tight. This is going to be our longest section. S words, there just tends to be a lot of them. So let's read these out together. Stultify, scurrilous, sedentary, surfeit, sedulous, Sisyphean, surreptitious, sequester, squalid, scion. Now these are the words we're going to be going over today. Some of them you might be familiar with, some of them you might have absolutely no idea. That's perfectly fine. Let's just start off with the first word today, which is the word stultify. Stultify is a verb to have a dulling or inhibiting effect on, to impair, invalidate, or to make ineffective. As you can see, there's a bit of a semicolon there, so we're going to split it. And stultify, to have an dulling effect or an ineffective kind of effect, making something ineffective, making something have no power. Synonyms for that reason would be hamper, impede, repress, smother, suppress, deaden, benumb, and thwart. To keep from happening or inhibit from happening. Benumb, make sure that you can't feel anything. Deaden, again, really make sure that nothing happens. And also for us, for our purposes, I would definitely say the word hamper and impede, okay? Actually, these ones should be a little bit familiar, in fact. Impede, again, being the best one out of them all. I think it's one of those underrated words that not a lot of us use, even though we definitely can, and is very productive in our essays. If you accidentally drop your cell phone in water, you will effectively stultify it. Now, this might not be true anymore with all those nice fancy phones coming out that are always waterproof, but in the past, in the way back when of, let's say, 2000s, right? Early 2000s. If you dropped your phone in water, you didn't have a phone anymore. It would not work. You would effectively stultify it. You would make sure that it is impaired, invalidated, and completely ineffective. It would not turn on after that point. You would have to be lucky and possibly dry it out in a very, let's say, archaic manner, like sticking it in rice, for it to work again. And so we have the word stultify, to make ineffective or make it, no longer usable, no longer workable. By referencing actual statistics, he was able to stultify his opponent's argument. By using real stats, by using actual, realistic facts in his argument, he was able to prevent the opponent from actually winning the argument by saying, hey, well, listen, I have facts, I have statistics. In this debate between me and you, I can pull up numbers. Then what happens to the opponent? they can't really say anything because it's proven with numbers, with facts. And so he's able to stultify or invalidate anything that he says afterwards. A tranquilizer gun will effectively stultify even the most violent animals. And so stultify here, not necessarily meaning invalidate or kill, but rather they are going to make them ineffective. They are going to suppress them, impede or hamper their actions, and make them calm down, if not fall asleep. Kryptonite is the only thing that will effectively stultify Superman. So stop him from doing whatever it is that he's trying to do, make him ineffective. All of his powers will be ineffective. So there was one thing that I do want to point out, because you guys probably noticed it, is that the word stultify is paired with the word effectively. Effectively here does not mean to do a really good job, but rather the word effectively is used to describe how it will pretty much stop them from doing whatever they want to do. Pretty much stop them from, fighting Lex Luthor. Stop them from flying around. It will most likely, most probably, stop them. And that's what the word effectively here is being used as. Just kind of emphasize this, just to make it more generic, but also to emphasize how it will be put to a halt. Then we have the word scurrilous. This is using or giving to coarse language containing obscenities, abuse, or slander. It's also an adjective. Talking very nastily, using trash talk pretty much, and also quite negative language as well. Using slurs, using curse words, curses, and quite coarse language, so very harsh language as well. Not really nice to hear. Synonyms are abusive, contumelious, invective, vitriolic, truculent, and vituperatory. Vitriolic is one of my favorite words. I think it's just very neat. And also the word truculent as well. We're going to be discussing this later on in our T section. But these two are the ones I would highly recommend that we pay attention to, because these both means that it is quite harsh, quite coarse. The language itself is quite damaging, but also it is very negative as well. Just naturally, just objectively, the connotation means negative. Very, very negative. And of course, if you're going to be cursing, if you're going to be using coarse language, of course it's negative. I can't believe I have to state this for some people. Jeremy got me fired by telling my boss scurrilous lies about me. Here we're talking not necessarily obscenities, but we're talking about abuse and slander. It's telling lies. Lies is another way to think of it. And so with that, this person, they end up getting fired because somebody's whispering rumors around the workplace saying, oh, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? All this abuse and slander, all these lies, all these negative comments that don't make this person look good. And so hopefully we're not falling into that category of doing that ourselves. Luke has made several scurrilous comments about the bank that foreclosed on his home. If you have a bank that's foreclosing on your home, you're pretty much losing your home. And so he's made a very, coarse selection of statements against the bank, as one would if you lose your house. And probably scurrilous here, meaning abusive and also perhaps containing some obscenities. In an attempt to stain my character, someone is telling scurrilous stories about me. Here, stories, also the word scurrilous. They're trying to tell damaging stories, cursing stories, coarse languages as well, or like coarse language, and also very abusive, very much lies, slander, telling very negative things about me. The newspaper editor wrote several scurrilous articles on the politicians' spending habits. So abusive, slander, so making them look very negative to the public's eye, as well as scurrilous, just generally more so less, meaning that they used coarse language, very vitriolic, had a lot of hatred, very negative as well. And so overall, scurrilous, quite a negative word, and also to make somebody look very bad. Then we have the word sedentary. This is an adjective. If you guys have taken a health class, then you might be familiar with this word. Sedentary is meaning not physically active, not migratory, or permanently attached. Now, I did have a semicolon here just simply because there are two main ways that we can see this word. Sedentary as a lifestyle, as well as sedentary as a descriptive word for things that are just generally not moving. If I say to somebody that, like this person, Lucy, they are sedentary, they live a sedentary lifestyle, that doesn't mean that they're not migratory or they're permanently attached to their chair. No, Sedentary in that kind of context means that they don't like getting out of bed, they like to lay in bed all day, they don't do anything, they don't exercise, they don't go for walks. That would be sedentary lifestyle. However, if I said, oh, you know, that chair is sedentary, like in this room, that chair is sedentary. It doesn't move from its spot, it stays exactly where it is, and we always see it in that position. It's nearly permanently attached, and it's not migratory, it won't move around. Synonyms, therefore, are sitting, seated, inactive, stationary, immobile, resting, or static. As you can see, some of them are talking about not being physically active. Some of them might just be more not moving at all. And that's perfectly fine. You can usually just switch these around. Sedentary works for those as well. Stationary, meaning not moving, very good here. And we're not talking about, papers and pens kind of stationary. We're talking stationary as in not moving, and also the word static. Now, between these two words, I would interestingly say that the word static is one that you need to pay attention to a little bit more, simply because this word does come up quite often, surprisingly often. And if you guys want to be, maybe a little bit ahead of the game in your English classes, then you might want to remember this word, static. Their health problems were caused by their sedentary lifestyles. So health problems caused by sedentary lifestyles here, and sedentary. What might this mean? They're probably sick, or they might be feeling ill because they don't move around a lot. They don't exercise. They don't go for walks. They don't move around the house either. They just lay or sit in the exact same position all day, every day, and that's what's causing their health problems. They're not getting enough exercise. And so sedentary here is meaning not physically active. Some children become sedentary in front of a television and refuse to go outside. And here we don't have to talk about it as like an actual lifestyle, but rather you can just use it as a descriptor that children... With the V's long forgotten now at this point, I'm assuming, let's go on to the letter W and talk about W part 1, our first 10 words. Let's read these out together. They will be short and easy to say, monosyllabic, one syllable. So let's make sure that we do it at least correctly. Waggish, waft, wail, wallow, wan, wangle, wane, warrant, wary, welter. Now, as you guys can see, these words, they look quite simple, but as also you can see, they look very similar to one another. And so this does become a point of contention for a lot of students because they get them very easily mixed up. Again, let's make sure that we know the definitions very clearly as we move along, and also be able to differentiate between, let's say, wan and wail, waft and wail, and wane, so even me getting them confused right now, that should be indicative of how often students tend to get these confused. But let's start off with the word waggish. This is an adjective, humorous in a playful, mischievous, or facetious manner, okay? Again, not facious, facetious manner. Synonyms are jesting, droll, puckish, jesting, jocular, comical, witty, and whimsical. Okay, I'll go ahead and take away this jesting here, but we also want to focus in on this word puckish, okay? You know how like lots of videos ago, I said something about how one of the words was based off of a Shakespearean character named Shylock. Again, here we have the word puckish. I'm willing to bet right now that a lot of you guys don't know where that comes from, and you can also argue that the word puckish, comes from another Shakespeare character as well. And so, with that being said, honor Shakespeare, give him a little bit of veneration, let's say, and give him a little bit of credit for what he does come up with. But waggish here, we're talking about being humorous in a very playful manner, usually in some kind of trickster manner as well. We see this a lot with jokesters, tricksters, minstrels, all those fun people. This character is witty, waggish, provoking, and insightful. I really like the way it's written. We have our alliteration, and we also have a lot more information as well. They are intelligent, they are playful, they are provoking, and they are insightful. I think that this is a really good way of writing this sentence out, pretty much saying that the character is smart, they're funny, they can play tricks, they're mischievous, but also they have a lot to offer. And so for that reason, I like the word waggish, and something that we don't really see too often. And so, just overall, just in general, I'd say really strong word to start off with. The television show's waggish bloopers are sure to entertain its fans. Again, mischievous, very funny. Usually bloopers are not serious at all, and they tend to be a little bit mischievous or facetious as well. Not really having any depth to it, and usually being a little bit cruel in certain ways, or I would say more crass, but also very good. The waggish employees played computer games and completed very little work. The employees that like to play games, the ones that are mischievous, jokesters, tricksters, they like doing nothing. They're the ones who play computer games instead. And the teacher never let her students know she was amused by their waggish behavior, meaning that she found it entertaining, she found it funny, but she made sure not to let it show in front of her students because she knew then her stoic nature might actually come to fruition and show to the public, and she didn't want that. And so her waggish behavior, or their waggish behavior, she finds it entertaining, their mischievous, jokeful, playful behavior. And that's this word waggish. Then we go on to the word waft. We're going to be talking about the verb form, not the noun form, but the verb form, to cause to move or go lightly by or as if by the impulse of wind or waves. Now, a waft is very specific in this manner. A waft is not going. It is lightly, gently floating, going, but it only works with air, specifically winds, or waves. And the waves have to be very gentle as well. Very specific, I know. But the word waft tends to be used a lot in just day-to-day life as well as in essays. It's a very specific motion, and so there's not that many words that actually define or can be used to replace the word waft. We have drift, float, glide, whirl, transmit, carry, blow, convey, and transport. I would say that if we were going to at least have some kind of connotation to this word, we'd split it that way so that we have these 5 on this side and then the 4 on that side. The 5, they're pretty much generic, saying, going from point A to point B. The first 4, however, though, drift, float, guide, whirl, all of these have their own, connotation. If you're drifting, oftentimes that is somewhere, on water, or perhaps without thinking you are going over land. Floating, that would be either specifically air or water, but it's not by wind or waves. You just stop and you're buoyant and you're going up and down. Gliding is to not touch, and then whirl is to specifically related to wind, move along with the wind. Again, not the same as waft. You cannot ignore the odor of food on a grill when it starts to waft through the air, meaning it is moving very slowly, incrementally, by the wind in a very light manner across the atmosphere and into the house. That is a very specific movement, I know, but there's a reason why there's this very specific word for it as well. We evacuated our home when the fumes from the forest fire began or started to waft into our town. Again, incrementally going, moving in the air, and then reaching its destination. It is very slow. The smell of delicious homemade chicken soup wafts through the house, again moving very slowly, and the scent of freshly baked cookies started to waft upstairs, quickly alerting the kids. And last but not least, again moving. As you guys can see, however, when we're talking about wafting, more often than not, we tend to use it with air, okay? We're talking about either a smell or a scent or perhaps smoke, something that has to do with wind or air, something along that line, okay? So when we are using the word waft, make sure that we're using it more often than not with the air meaning, okay? Moving through the air slowly, moving through the air tentatively. That is much more important than I would say over the water. You could use floating or drifting in those kinds of scenarios. Wafting again, however, very different, completely different, very specific word. Then we move on to the word wail. This is a verb. No, we're not talking about the animal whale, but we're talking about wail. This is a verb to express sorrow audibly, to make a sound suggestive of a mournful cry. So when you are wailing, oftentimes people misunderstand this word to just mean sobbing. And sobbing is profusely crying, or crying to an extreme degree. Like, for instance, if I got hurt very badly, but I didn't want to make any noise, you would just see tears streaming down my face. I would be sobbing. Doesn't really mean that I have to make noise. However, if I'm wailing, that means that I am being very loud about how I'm crying and I cannot stop it. Expressing sorrow, but very audibly. Easy for somebody to hear you cry. Also, to make a sound suggestive of a mournful cry. A mournful cry meaning somebody has passed on, you are feeling hurt. And so, when you are wailing, please, I hope you're okay? Synonyms here can be bawl, whimper, blubber, yowl, moan, sob, howl, lament, sorrow, snivel, or shriek. Again, lots of different words, all wrong connotations. They don't really do a one-to-one with the word wail. They all talk about being upset, yes, but none of them are exactly wailing. I would say that if we were to perhaps pick one out of all of them and say this is the one that is the most similar to the word wail, it would be to bawl. But even then, I think wailing is better. And also, if you were to say, they're being very loud and you want to emphasize that, the second place word would be the word howl. Other than that, though, all these words, whimper, quietly, blubber, you would be making noises, but it doesn't make any sense. Yowl, like a cat. Moan, like a groan. Sob, again, sobbing. Lamenting, being more sorrowful. Sorrow ties in with lamenting. Snivel and shrieking, other noises, probably, nose noises or, screaming, just straight up screaming. And so they're all very different. The cars pulled to the side of the road when they heard the wail, the ambulance siren. So the wail of the ambulance siren. So as they were driving, they heard the shrieking, sorrowful, mournful cry saying somebody's hurt. And that's why the word wail works really well here, because here, the word ambulance, it's not a person. People can wail, not animals, nothing else. But we have a siren, we have an ambulance siren that mimics the sound of sorrowful cries, and it lets us know that somebody is hurt. And that's why that's really important for us to keep in mind when we use the word wail. Let's look at a few more sentences. Melissa let off a heartbroken wail when she learned of her father's death. Again, this idea of passing away or being mournful, being